Welcome back to the KAHI Afternoon News. Good afternoon. I am Casey Freelove. Pleased to be joined by Congressman Tom McClintock for our weekly conversation. And Tom, we talked a little bit about this last week, but I kind of want to recap the discussion about wildfire and climate change at the 23rd Annual Lake Tahoe Summit. It was all over the local media, and I really liked some of the talking points that you brought up because, I mean, you've got Governor Newsom up there kind of preaching what he sees as the issue. And then when you got up there and made your remarks, you kind of pointed out some things that I think is very important for the public to get to know. I mean, I was even talking to my mom about this because she saw an item on local media about just how dangerous Lake Tahoe is due to the lack of forest management. I was hoping we could just talk about that a little bit, the danger that is there.
Well, the left is using global warming as an excuse for doing nothing about our forests, and that's just outrageous. And I tried to point out to them, back before the turn of the last century, we lost between 4.5 and 12 million acres to wildfire every year in California. It was only after we tasked the Forest Service to actively manage our forests that figure dropped, and it dropped dramatically. Last half of the 20th century, it was a steady 250,000 acres a year rather than the 4.5 to 12 million we used to lose. Well, last year, that number went back up to 1.9 million acres. What happened between the end of the 20th century and now? Well, those environmental laws have made it all but impossible for the Forest Service to manage the forests. And so we lost 1.9 million acres in the last year. That's not a new normal. That's the old normal that's reasserting itself because we stopped managing our forests. And the other excuse they're constantly using is, we just need more money. Well, the fact of it is, before those laws went into place, harvesting excess timber off the federal lands used to make the federal government money, $1 billion a year, and 25% of that went directly into local government coffers. The other 75% went to the Forest Service and forest management programs. So their excuses just don't wash. The one thing that has changed in the last few decades has been the imposition of these laws that have prevented the U.S. Forest Service from actually managing our forests. And as anybody with a garden knows, a forest is exactly the same as an untended garden. If you don't take care of it, it will grow and grow and grow until it chokes itself to death. And then in the case of a forest, it will fall victim to disease, pestilence, drought, and ultimately catastrophic wildfire.
Now, in getting a chance to be at this conference and visit with some of these other leaders of our state, do you feel that there is room for some compromise? Because you're talking about something that seems to me to be grounded in reality, whereas some of the comments that I was reading from either Governor Newsom or even from Dianne Feinstein, they're not looking at it the same way that you are. But the bottom line is protecting our forests, it matters no matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. So do you feel that maybe moving forward there can be a more open conversation to actually get something concrete done?
Well, we actually did get limited bipartisan support of my version of the Tahoe Restoration Act. The heart of that act was to streamline these environmental regulations for the Tahoe Basin so that we could get back to active forest management of the Tahoe forest, which right now are carrying about 4 times the safe fuel density in the lower basin. And that authority has now been granted. The Forest Service is now implementing it. Before our law, and if you wanted to cut down a tree, it was a massive environmental impact review. It would take between 4 and 5 years, millions and millions of dollars, and 500 pages or more of report. Under the new authority that was in my bill that we got into law, it now takes not 4 to 5 years, but less than 4 months, and not more than 500 pages, but a 16-page report. And so that work is now proceeding, and that's going to mean all the difference in the world to our ability to be able to tend to these lands before it's too late.
We're visiting with Congressman Tom McClintock here on KAHI. Another subject along those lines, I just want to get your thoughts on this. I've been doing a lot of news stories about what's going to become a crisis if it's not already there, and that is the amount of people living in rural areas that are being dropped essentially by their insurance companies. Now, there's a couple of fail-safe or dropbacks that can help people in the short term, But long term, this is going to be a huge issue for people in your district and really anybody in our listening audience. What do you think can be done, and is it at a crisis level already?
Oh, it is at a crisis level, and the reason, again, goes right back to the management of our forests. The deterioration of our forests and their proneness now to massive fire is directly driving these skyrocketing fire insurance premiums. Remember, insurance is how a market assigns a dollar value to the risk of a catastrophic loss. So when the risk goes up, the cost of insurance goes up. And when the risk becomes unacceptable, the insurance simply becomes unavailable, and that's exactly what we're seeing today.
Yeah, and it seems
you want to bring those insurance prices back down. We've got to get back to the era of active management where we were losing just 250,000 acres to wildfire a year rather than the nearly 2 million that we lost in the last year.
I want to change gears. I was just kind of combing around the internet looking at some things that have been discussed and will be discussed in Congress. One thing that annoys every person that's listening to our program right now are robocalls. And I was reading about the passage of the bipartisan Traced Act in the Senate, which was followed by near unanimous approval of the Stopping Bad Robocalls Act in the House. I guess the bottom line is I actually experienced this. I was visiting my mother the other day, and she must have got 8 phone calls, and we're talking in the 8 o'clock hour of the morning, and 9 of those were not real people. People are very frustrated. Sometimes it seems like even the do not call registry list doesn't fully cover all that. What is the future of preventing robocalls and just kind of these basic annoyances that kind of get under everybody's skin?
Well, I think the bill that you referenced will probably help. The fundamental problem was that do not call list ultimately did not. There were technical ways of getting around it, which now every robo firm employs, and I don't know the technical details of it, but
it should help.
That's why you're seeing, in spite of the fact you're on the do not call list, you're seeing a growing number of robocalls again, and they are annoying. I get them at dinner too. I just monitor the calls, and if it's not coming from somebody I know, I don't answer it. well, that seems like a very simple solution that would work. Another thing I was looking at, just because I was reading about just what Governor Gavin Newsom has been up to, the homeless crisis in our state, and I know we've touched on this before, it's kind of at a peak level right now. A bunch of people leaving the state, which we've talked about in the past, and it doesn't seem like there's any clear-cut path for what they're going to do. It feels to me like the people that are in the leadership of this state are really playing politics, kind of saying what they think the public wants to hear to get the crisis under control. But even if you drive down to Sacramento with your family, I mean, you're seeing tent cities, you're seeing people on the streets, and it doesn't feel like much progress has been made or even that there is hope for it to be made moving forward. Well, a lot of that is because of policies that California has enacted. I had a group of city council members here in the district office last week complaining bitterly about the fact they're no longer allowed to enforce their local anti-vagrancy laws. Under the state's law, you want to pitch a tent on public land, nobody can stop you. That used to be illegal. It is illegal according to many local ordinances, but they're no longer allowed to enforce them. And the other problem we've got, and all this comes back to public policy, and you may have noticed that the homeless problem is the most intense in those cities and states where the left has controlled the policies for more than a generation.
Yes.
One of the things that's driving them is bad law enforcement, because law enforcement has been hobbled. Another is because communities are forbidden to enforce their anti-vagrancy laws. And another huge one is the fact that government policies in California had driven the price of housing so astronomically that even people who have jobs can no longer afford to keep a roof over their head in some cases. And we have a new phenomenon called the working homeless. And that all goes back to public policy. I mean, you look at the states that are well governed, that have a light regulatory burden, and respect people's property rights. Housing values in those states are a third or less of what they are here in California, and those other states like Illinois and New York and Connecticut that have imposed all of these left-wing housing policies over a generation.
We're visiting with Congressman Tom McClintock here on KAHI. Let me conclude on this, Tom. As the August recess wraps up and Congress gets back in session, What are some of the top items that we should be looking for in the public? I know, obviously, with you, this wildfire and the fire prevention thing is going to be something that's brought up, and I can guarantee you on behalf of the audience, we appreciate that. But what are some other things we should look for maybe nationally as Congress gets underway? I mean, you have so much to do and so little time, it feels like.
Well, I think at this moment in our history, the single greatest threat to our nation's sovereignty and security, and it's the biggest threat I've seen in my lifetime, is perhaps the biggest threat our country's ever faced, is the virtual collapse of our southern border. We've had 1 million illegal immigrants crossing that border in defiance of our laws this past year alone. If we don't get that under control, within just a few years' time, our borders will mean absolutely nothing. And the president is doing everything he can with his authority to try to stem this, but ultimately it's going to require congressional action. And so far, the majority Democrats have done absolutely nothing except embrace policies that all add up to completely open borders. In fact, their presidential candidates endorsed the notion of rescinding the law that makes it a crime to cross the border illegally.
We've been visiting with Congressman Tom McClintock here on KAHI. Tom, as always, thanks so much for your time, and we'll look forward to talking again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We'll take a quick break and be right back here on KAHI.